Hello, everyone. Welcome to our webinar today, Little Known Facts about Neuroscience that can lead you to extraordinary results with Judith Glaser and a CBODN conference committee. Before we get started, while some people are still joining us, put my screen in full display mode here. We talk a little bit about some webinar housekeeping. If you have any trouble hearing us or any sort of problems at all, you might want to try disconnecting and connecting again. That oftentimes fixes whatever is going on. Your audio line is muted, but you can use the Q&A box or chat box to ask a question or ask for help at any time. And we'll try and monitor that and help you if we can. And we do have a Q&A session scheduled near the end. We hope we have enough time for that, but we've had a lot of questions submitted, so we'll see how the time works out for us. And if you happen to tweet during the webinar or after the webinar, we'd appreciate if you'd use the hashtag CBODN15. That way we'll monitor for that hashtag and be able to see your tweets and respond to them if you ask any more questions. Next, I'd like to welcome Judith Glaser to our webinar today. She's our guest speaker. Judith is an author, an organizational anthropologist, and maybe I'll stop it right there. Judith, and can you explain what an organizational anthropologist is?
Yeah, I think there are a handful of us doing this now. My basic study was looking at humanity from the time we started to be humans until the present and beyond, and there was no field for this, so I figured that if my interest is in organizations as we are now and as we're growing and the history of humanity and put it together, that somehow that would give me oversight to be able to include all of the wonderful things from neuroscience to linguistics and semantics and how people think together. So the bottom line is I created this field, and now there are lots of people that are trying to join it, which is wonderful.
Okay, thank you, Judith. Thank you for that explanation. And Judith is also the founder and CEO of Benchmark Communications and chairman of the Creating We Institute. She has over 30 years of business experience working with CEOs and their teams. She's the author of 7 books, and 4 have been bestsellers. And her most recent book, which we'll be talking about during this webinar, is Conversational Intelligence: How Great Leaders Build Trust and Get Extraordinary Results. And the moderators today are myself, Bill Fox. I'm working with the CBODN program conference team. And also joining me here today is Karen Mack. She's the co-chair for the conference and owner of Karen Mack Consultants. And she's very passionate about helping people see and change as an opportunity. Karen?
Thanks, Bill, and thanks everyone who has chosen to join us. This is an exciting webinar in preparation for our conference that's coming up on April 24th and 25th. As we transition to give Judith the opportunity to share her information, I'd like to just share with you that we received so many great questions for Judith, so many that we may not be able to get to all of them, but what we did do was go through and try to organize the questions and put them in various categories, because some of them had some of the same themes or some of the same types of things were being asked, enough so that we were able to put them into various categories. So we broke the categories down, and we're hoping that those who submitted questions as of yesterday afternoon, and even those who are submitting questions today, we hope that we're able to capture what you want to know in 5 categories. Judith is going to talk about 5 categories of questions, the first one being engagement, and what does conversational intelligence have to do with engagement, and how can we use it? The second category of questions are on self-awareness and self-management. What do we do ourselves that can help us in situations? The next category is using the neuroscience and understanding neuroscience, and that's what conversational intelligence is all about. The next category of questions came in what Judith calls CIQ, which is conversational intelligence, so they're more specific to that area. And then, as you can probably guess or imagine, there were lots of questions about lots of topics. Then we'll try to capture some of those before we have to do our hard stop final questions and be respectful of your time. So with that said, I'd like to say thank you again, Judith, for joining us. And if you can share what you'd like to share before we actually get into the first category of questions, we're ready to listen.
That's wonderful. And Karen, I'd like to check. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. Wonderful. That's terrific. So we're talking about conversational intelligence today. And I think of it as how great leaders build trust and get extraordinary results. Because this is really the whole world of leadership. It's not just leaders in business, but it's leaders in starting at a young age. People thinking of themselves as leaders need to understand what this work is all about. And trust is the heart of this work. Let me start with a provocative statement by Pentagon spokesman Robert McCloskey. And his comments to the world were, "I know that you believe you understand what you think I said, but I'm not sure you realize that what you heard is not what I meant." And it's so often the case that we're in conversations and we realize somewhere along the line we get this gut instinct or head instinct that we're not really connecting in a full way. Part of it is because our brain only has so much energy to expend in any moment on a situation, and many times the situations we talk about are much bigger than the moment itself. And so the case is that this work, I believe, was put in front of us all to begin to sit back and reflect on what is conversational intelligence? Why is it that 9 out of 10 conversations fail to meet the mark or fail to connect people in the way that they need to be connected? What can we learn as human beings? What can we learn and what can we teach children when they start out so that they have the ability to close the gaps and the reality gaps around us as we're having conversations so people can, in fact, connect in deeper ways? And with that, I'd actually like to start with my grandson. His name is Sean Corwin Glaser. His mom is an OD expert in our field, so I love everything that she does to help raise little Sean, who's now just turned 3. And I'm sharing this because of a conversation that Sean had with his mother that really puts a light on the fact that from the very beginning a child is born, that a child has the capacity for conversational intelligence. It's hardwired in us. And so here's Sean on his 3rd birthday. His mom gave him a t-shirt that says, "Every superhero needs a sidekick," and mine is arriving July 2015, which is when his brother is going to come into the world. The reason why I love the conversation that Sean had that night, he was so excited and thinking about his brother and thinking about his party. What you need to know about Sean is that he had an ear infection when he was younger, and the first 6 to 10 months of his life, maybe a little bit longer, he was having a little difficulty hearing and nobody knew it. And so his focus on listening was lowered by that capacity. His focus on seeing was increased. And when he finally had the tubes taken out or tubes put in and he could hear, he started to mimic people speaking. So something in that conversation, something in that moment about listening, speaking, and asking questions is important for what we're going to be talking about today. So here's the conversation. After that night, "Mommy," that's Liz, "good night, Sean. Mommy is done talking." And Sean said, "Wait, Mommy, you can't go because I have more words to say and more questions to ask." More words to say, that's telling, and more questions to ask, that's asking. The dynamic of ask and tell is the heart of how people learn how to have conversations. Ask and tell and listen. And so Liz said laughingly, "I know, honey, we can talk more tomorrow," not cutting off the conversation forever. And so really the whole thing is leading up to the fact that connecting with others is the most important thing we do in our life. Learning how to do it when we're young, or learning how to do it when we get older, if for any reason the interaction dynamics weren't perfect when we were growing up, is the most important thing in the world. I started this career when I was 11 years old, when I discovered I grew up in a family that did not share a lot about our history. It was a very private, in some cases, embarrassment about the origins of my parents. And so I learned when I was 11 by finding an article that my dad grew up as a stutterer. He stuttered. My grandmother basically didn't want boys. She said she wanted girls. My dad was a twin with a sister who had water on the brain and who died at 5.5. And his job, according to my grandmother, was to push our carriage. And so my dad was an emotional orphan. He grew up most of his life not speaking in order to connect to people effectively, being an incredible auditory recall person, because that's what his senses were doing, is transferring that to his hearing. But this is the point. He had a teacher when he was in high school who saw in him greatness, and asked him if he would be willing to be the star of a play. And after much fear, he did. He took that on, and when he did and stood on the stage with the teachers coaching, his whole life changed, and he was able to speak without stuttering. At age 11, I wanted to find out what are the conversations that human beings have with each other that cause us to pull back and not connect well, or enable us to move forward and connect with others in deep ways. And that's what we're going to be talking about next. I spent my graduate career in a fellowship program that took young children and studied what kind of environments they need to be healthy. And we turned the world upside down. Instead of focusing on teaching children, and that's what teachers do, they tell kids a lot of stuff, and kids have to learn and then study. We do that when people become adults and go to work. There's a lot about telling that we have to that we, in this essence, get tested on in our life. And I turned that upside down and said, what if we were able to pull from children their view of the world, their stories, their pictures, how they saw the world, and enable them to read and write on their own view of the world, their own stories? How would their lives change? That's the pull instead of the push. And we followed these kids for 10 years through school. And the most astounding research that I've ever seen and that's ever been documented on child development, every child who went through the program had an increase of IQ by 15 points. That's IQ. They had an emotional intelligence, they didn't know what to call it back then, far beyond their years, somewhere 2 to 3 to 4 years beyond other kids in their class, regardless of where they started socioeconomically. Every child went on to college. So there's something about the wisdom here that we need to bring into the world of conversational intelligence. This was a GE-funded project. This is my incredible professor who gave me the world of insight for doing the kind of work we're doing and validating it. So as we head into the questions, the key of all of this work is getting to the next level of greatness depends on the quality of the culture, which depends on the quality of relationships, which depends on the quality of conversations. Everything happens through conversation. Everything happens through conversation. So engagement is our first topic. I want to say a couple of brief things about engagement. That for us who are in this field, I know everyone on the line is dedicated to engagement as being one of the most important things that we do with our clients and facilitate with our clients. The concept of there is no I in team didn't make sense to me. And if you look here, there is an I in team. Not only is there an I in team, but in a theory that I started to develop when I was 21, it is differentiation, that's enabling the I to be differentiated, plus integration, that enables the I's to integrate into a society, a group, or a team, leads to generativity. And that's the foundation of this work. If we enable people to find their identity, as my father finally found someone who helped him do, and we enable people to find where they fit into a team so that they're in, not out, so that they're loved, not disregarded or minimized, something happens to set off a chemistry even before we have the conversation that enables human beings to connect in extraordinary ways. So conversational intelligence has a dashboard to it, and it has levels, and we're not going to go into depth of my work at this point, just to show you a picture that we're going to be talking about, which is this is the conversational dashboard. It used to be called the arc of engagement. It shows that resistors on the left and co-creators on the right, that we hang out in different places along this engagement continuum, resist, skeptic, wait and see, experimenter, and I didn't spell it wrong. It is the mentor of the experiment and co-creator, that we move through levels of conversation with each other as we learn to engage transactionally, to connect, as we learn to have a point of view and a position inside of a group, and then as we learn to be transformational and help transform the energy of the group to create extraordinary outcomes. This is where we understand that human beings connect through energy. This is where we understand about the lower brain and the prefrontal cortex, both being contributors to producing unusual behaviors in people. The cortisol is about production of fear. We protect, we fight and freeze and appease, distrust people. Oxytocin is what's needed for us to partner and move into trust, integrity, compassion, foresight, and to deal with the reality gaps that we're presented with every day. So this is the story. Do you have any questions? I'm going to toss it back to you.
Yes, I do.
Karen.
I do have a few questions, Judith, if I can just put a couple things out as I look at this, the conversational intelligence dashboard. There were a couple of questions
I'm
that were
tossing back to you,
asking.
Karen. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me? Hello, Judith, can you hear me?
I can hear you, Karen.
Okay, so Bill, maybe you should ask if Judith can't hear the question.
I got it.
Okay, great. All right. So Judith, there are a couple of questions based upon the conversational intelligence dashboard that you're showing us. A couple of questions we're asking, how do we engage the disengage, and how do we build curiosity in the uninformed and uninterested?
Let me springboard off of this dashboard first. I have used this in many very difficult on-site transformational engagements with clients where you have silos, people aren't trusting each other. The problems were bigger than mountains that anybody could conceive of. And I used this dashboard, I put it up on the wall when I was launching meetings to ask people if they could find where they are on this gauge, on this dashboard, as one of the questions. It wasn't always the first by any means, but it was early in the process. And I used it because once we start to pull with people as opposed to push, and the disengaged are sometimes people that just sit there and we start to build in our head a story or narrative about who they are and what they're all about, that our own head gets in the way of reaching out across to that person to bring them in. And so when I put this up and I'll ask people, where are you on this dashboard? Or what would it take to bring you forward? Those questions are pull questions, not push questions, and they're non-judgmental. I'm listening to connect, not reject or judge. And when we begin to think in those terms, all of a sudden we're able to bring people that were immovable and resistant to participate in a conversation so that they feel that they are understood and that we can find out what's on their mind. So that's one strategy that can be used with this tool in order to bring people into conversation, even if they appear not to be interested.
Okay. Let me try to get another one in before we move to the next category of questions. Chris asked, given people make judgments within seconds of meeting you or of beginning a conversation, what are the most important things to say and do behaviorally to get off on the right foot when discussing something difficult like change?
So what's really important is that there's two chemicals that show up when we're engaging with people. One is the cortisol, which is here, and the other is oxytocin. And it's really fascinating, but even in difficult moments, if we do, and this may sound like it's a small thing, but it's not, if we do some things that activate oxytocin, the chemistry, even before we start talking, it creates a priming for the brain that enables us to have a different kind of conversation. And so even if you're in a difficult situation with a person, reaching out to shake their hand and saying thank you very much for being available for this conversation, and looking them in the eye and really meaning that you believe that this is going to be an important conversation for both of you. Both the touching of the hand produces a flood of oxytocin, looking in people's eyes to make them feel comfortable, because people don't go into meetings to fight, they go into to work them out, but our mindset of fear that comes into, oh, I've been with this person before, it's not going to work out, often sets into place a chemistry that puts us in a protect behavior, which therefore removes our ability to think more strategically and clearly and empathetically with people. So by priming, even in a difficult situation, we begin to activate the chemistry that enables, and when I say it enables, it literally floods the brain, oxytocin, activating parts of the brain that become accessible for empathy or accessible for thinking through difficult situations together. So this is what our research is showing, is one of the important steps for moving with others, not against others.
So thank you, Judith. I think that might touch on a question that Bill had about how to engage traditional analytical or show me the return on investment mindset. Perhaps if we are coming from the oxytocin side, we can step into that arena.
Yeah.
Perhaps now we can hear more from you on the next category of questions in the interest of our time on self-awareness and self-management practices.
Yep. So for conversational intelligence, self-awareness is the ability to link intention and impact. And so that's the ability to have an idea that you want to do something, and then going through the learning process to begin to see how what you say and do with people impacts them. And so when you link intention and impact, I call that creating the third eye. That's the eye of self-awareness, where you actually can step back and see yourself like this guy is doing, and almost watch your brain, feel it processing, slow it down so that you can begin to make choices in the moment and not be activated by some trigger events that can cause you to move into distrust, which again will cause you to move into the lower brain. Does this definition make sense in your world?
Yes, I think so, absolutely.
Okay.
It's just a matter of practicing it.
And being open.
So Bill, do you have some questions for Judith?
Sure, we have a few here, Karen. First one is from Libby, Judith. And her question is, what's the first step in creating self-awareness and taking the next step that it's something you want to focus intention and practice new behavior?
The first step is being open to take a look at what your patterns are of interaction. It's really fascinating. A lot of leaders don't know what, I mean, the word interaction dynamics is not known yet, so it's part of a new dictionary or lexicon of conversational intelligence. But the willingness to be able to look at your patterns, and we happen to have a tool, there are a number of different ways to do this, but that show that a person fills out, and it shows what are the red activators for them, what causes them to create cortisol in people and themselves, and then what are the green activators or what causes oxytocin. So the first step is just being willing to look at what your preferences are when it comes to engagement. And people are amazed at what the patterns show, because they also show how you may think you're doing something great, like caring for people and asking lots of questions, but as we learn in the world of conversational intelligence that oxytocin doesn't live as long as cortisol in the body. Oxytocin may have a couple of hours shelf life at best, where cortisol can have, if it's a high spike of fear in someone while you're conversing, can produce 26 hours of cortisol being spewed in your brain. That means that you are seeing through a new lens of fear on a lot of things that you're doing, and that if you ruminate over it with other people because you're really upset about what a boss said to you, then that goes another 26 hours. And so it begins to pull you away from engaging in a healthy way. Once people start to learn that, then, boy, do we get curiosity, even out of the ROI people, because in a way it's their personal ROI that they're looking at. So I get very little resistance once people start to look at their patterns.
Okay, great. That's a great lead into their next question from Jill, Judith. And her question is, what brain-based practices can help you with reframing your story about a difficult colleague?
The first thing is that I like to think about reframing, and Jill uses the word reframing, that a difficult colleague, think of them as a human being that's having difficulty expressing what they want to express with you and to you. And so that it's not that they're bad, because difficult can often mean bad to people or frustrating to me, or whatever the words are that we attach. I have a wonderful word called double clicking that I have brought into conversational intelligence, and we all do it on our computer. We double click on a folder. When you double click on what the word means, difficult colleague, is it difficult to you or difficult to them? And we start to explore what difficulty means through a potential mind map, like you introduced to me, Bill. So it's redefining that word, opening it up to find out where the difficulty lies, exploring where the difficulty lies, and begin to do things to help bridge the relationship in the moment so that people don't feel as difficult.
Okay, thank you. Karen, do we have time for another question in this category?
I think so. I think that what Judith just shared, it actually addresses Kathy's question.
Yeah.
If you want to just mention that, or if you can get Janice, I think we have a minute or so. We can take one more.
Okay, let's go with Janice. Her question was, in a group conversation, what is a good technique or trick that can keep me from taking too much of the floor time and balance the sharing of the conversation?
I love the world where I am an anthropologist at heart, is that I love the world of rituals, conversational rituals. And the most wonderful rituals are to start meetings with rules of engagement. How do we want this conversation to be for all of us? And you give permission to people to be a time checker. You give permission to people to mirror the patterns that you're seeing in the room. You get people, give them permission to interrupt a pattern. We call it pattern interrupt, or if they get caught in the past too much, or so forth. Once people know what the rules of engagement are, then they can co-facilitate, which is really an important part of this work, co-facilitate conversations with each other. You don't get triggered as much, and you're present for the experience of being with others.
Okay, thank you. Karen, you want to go to the neuroscience area?
Bill, we can just have Judith go ahead and start talking about neuroscience.
Okay.
Okay. Let me do that by just saying that one of the questions that Kathy asked was about the threat model. And so we know that conversations close us down or open us up, that there's neuroscience behind what closes us down. That's a lot of the chemistry around the threats. And so what I've done is I've put up some of the most important threats, and it actually spells the word threat so people can remember it. It is in my book, so people can reference it if they want to. We know about tone. We know about being humiliated. In fact, humiliation is one of the reasons why people withdraw from life. I know just 3 or 5 days ago, a doctor that I know hung himself, believe it or not, because of humiliation. It is worse than, people said, I'd rather be hit by a car than be humiliated. So the threat of humiliation, retribution causes us to withdraw, people trying to get back at us, and when we take a risk and we're making mistakes. So all of these, being excluded, animosity from others, territory being taken away, and the fear of losing status, these are threats that are so human. They're all about our identity. Remember that word, identity, is so much a part of this. And so I've been studying the neuroscience behind engagement. When two human beings connect to each other, or we connect in groups, leaders need to know this because it is the essential foundation for which all great conversations, all productivity in companies takes place. When we understand the patterns that drive human beings into engagement or away from engagement, it will change the life of, I believe, humanity. And starting early with children learning how to do this is essential. My hope is that the people, everybody on the line who's in this field of organization development, organization behavior, coaching, consulting, and facilitating, if there is a way that we could enable all leaders to learn how to be coaches and facilitators of conversations, the world is going to change. What changes is the chemistry, the brain cocktails that we've been talking about, that we actually have in our hand the tools for shifting conversations and shifting the conversational cocktails that live in our brain, whether it's cortisol for 26 hours plus, learning how to downregulate what causes that and upregulate what causes oxytocin. It makes it so much easier. Let me share with all of you that oxytocin is created in a spray now. It was used in experiments with autistic children. When they sprayed the spray of oxytocin in children's noses, they automatically started to reach out and connect with each other. In other words, it freed up the part of the brain that was causing them to protect and hold back. And I'm saying this quickly in a short amount of time, but the profound nature of this is that we have ways to help facilitate positive engagement. And I don't just mean positive good, I mean positive extraordinary inside of organizations. Doing that it will change the universe. Do you want to ask me some questions on neuroscience?
Yes, Karen? Absolutely. Marissa asked, what light can neuroscience shed on the concept of accountability?
The bottom line on accountability is too often leaders tell people what to do and then get frustrated when they're not accountable for it. We've learned that the telling part of the equation, of the conversational equation, does not lead to accountability. In few times does it. It might lead to compliance, but not to accountability. And so by bringing people in and asking them their view, like we did with the children, the talking typewriter, what's your view of reality? How do you see this project working? Where do you see your effort being most used? How would you like to get help from others to make sure that you can accomplish your goals? Those kinds of questions build accountability, but compliance does not.
Okay. Crystal asked, in the summary for the webinar, it mentions how reality imprints the brain. Does your research also include information on how the brain imprints or creates reality? This topic seems relevant to the subject of quantum physics. Are you able to speak to how quantum physics is or is not integrated within conversational intelligence?
This is one of those big questions. How many hours do we have for this webinar? Questions. I do have a little video here which shows that when human beings are with each other, there are reality gaps. Each person imprints the universe in a different way. Depending on where you stand in an organization, you might have a smaller view of the universe, or you might have a larger view of the universe. That's because we imprint as we experience and engage with others. And so there's the big universe. So we talk to each other like we're seeing the same reality, but in fact we're not. We're maybe focusing on the same thing, but our mind is imprinting it a different way. And so human beings have reality gaps all the time with each other. Reality gaps create uncertainty, and uncertainty creates fear. So much of what I believe this work is all about is honoring how our brain works. We do imprint and map energetically fields of interaction. We store them, we refer to them. We refer to the maps of people, places, things, experiences. And so what we're learning is that on the side of quantum physics, we know that every human being has a field around them that contains their energetic fields of experience. And what enables us to connect with others more in a healthy way is to put our hand through that field and reach out to another human being and explore and experience and double click and ask questions about and listen to connect about others' fields, because when we start to bring those energetic fields together, we actually then begin to create one universe, one sense of reality. And that's when organizations start to move forward in profound and rapid ways.
Okay. Let's try to get one more in this area of neuroscience. How does relaxation affect the brain? That's from John.
Okay, so relaxation, and I guess that's been one of the big topics that's often called everything from mindfulness to physical activity to even eating well. We now know that when we focus on putting our body and mind in a state of relaxation, we change the alpha and beta waves. We change how we receive the universe around us, and we actually create, I wish I had a picture to show you. I do have it on my computer. It's not here right now. We can share it in the future, but a picture of the expansion of how much bigger the universe we can take in when we're in a state of relaxation. We actually absorb more particles around us, we see it, and we retain it. We retain less when we're stressed, and we retain more when we're relaxed.
Okay. Well, knowing that, how about if we move into the next area of or category of questions and hear a little bit from you on CIQ?
Okay. I'm going to pass through these great slides.
Yes, I know. Unfortunately, we don't have time today, but we will have time during the post-conference seminar on Saturday, April the 25th.
Exactly. So conversational intelligence is the discipline that describes how we connect, navigate, and grow with others. Connect, navigate, and grow. So I've determined, discerned, and this is universal. I've been able to go around the world to different countries, from China to Dubai, and work with clients and coaches and OD specialists and consultants on this. And these are universal distinctions that talk about how people move with each other to create great things. And so we first have to connect, then learn how to navigate, and then our brains open up for us to grow together. The essential element, or the key core to this, is the sense of trust with another human being. And so you've seen how trust shapes reality, how we open up or close down. So conversational intelligence is based on helping people understand what we can all learn, the universal rituals for opening and closing down our environment, which leads to opening and closing down our brain. This is a picture that actually shows, this is the wisdom of the 5 brains. We have 5 brains, not one. Our heart is a brain as well. It's needed for us to connect to others. When we're frightful, we can't engage it in the same way, or it registers the fear of what's going on around us. So we can't tap into the prefrontal cortex heart connection, which is where the expansion of wisdom in the universe lives. There are 3 levels we talked about. At the moment of contact, our brain reads these in 0.07 seconds. Learning how to master how to be in level 1, 2, and 3 is essential for people to become effective and masters at conversational intelligence. We know that the heart actually receives the energy fields and the chemistry of what's going on faster than any other part of the brain. Then we move to the primitive brain that's sorting for the protect behaviors, the limbic, and the primitive is part of the limbic. But we've now pulled them apart. The way we talk about them in the industry is that they're separate, but they're connected. The limbic brain, about our emotional brain. The neocortex is our thinking brain. This is where knowledge, language, storing what we know exists. And then the prefrontal cortex, which is how we get to what we don't know. It's discovering the future. It's living through foresight. It's living through instinct. It's empathy with other human beings so that we can connect in better ways. When these two parts of the brain feel comfortable enough to speak with each other, it opens up the prefrontal cortex, which enables us then to tap into sharing energy with others. The lower parts of our brain focus on using up energy. That's entropy, where we go to the lowest common denominator. When we share energy with each other, when we're comfortable enough to do that, then we amplify the energetic fields, we grow them, we compound them, we make them bigger and better, we connect them. So trust or distrust really is the key behind all of this. Distrust is the lower brain, and trust literally lives in the prefrontal cortex heart connection. So, any questions may I ask?
Oh, sure, Judith. Karen, did you join back with us? Karen dropped off for some reason. She lost her connection. I just wanted to check. Are you there, Karen? Okay. I guess she'll be joining back with us here momentarily. Okay. A few questions here, Judith.
Yep.
And we have a question here from Mary Rose. How does conversational intelligence differ or shift between when you are the speaker and when you are the listener?
Oh, I think that when both speaker and listener are sharing the same reality and know and work on how to create and open the space for the best conversations to take place, then they both have ownership in being either a speaker or a listener, because great conversations require people to do both. So I don't make a distinction as clearly as that about the speaker and the listener, except that what they share in common is holding the space open for each to be present with the best conversation possible.
Okay, thank you. And from Patrick, his question is, can conversational intelligence help one discern one's calling in life?
You know, when I first read that, I went, wow. I don't know who you are, Patrick, but you're really touching on the edges and the fringes of what I hope conversational intelligence will bring to the world, and that is that when most conversations focus on content and fact and knowledge, but in fact our brain focuses on aspirations. Aspirations is where one's calling is in life. And the more we learn how to live in level 3 with each other, the more we begin to have access to our calling in life and why we were put on this planet and what our true identity is. So in my heart of hearts, thank you for asking that question, because I think it's profound and I think it's important and I think it's one that deserves a lot more attention in this field.
Thank you, Judith. That was a profound question and answer. Next question, I hope I pronounced the name correctly. It's Graham. His question was, how can a leader rebuild trust with a team through conversational intelligence and come across as authentic, genuine, when the leader's past behaviors did not instill much trust?
Sometimes leaders don't realize that they're not instilling trust. That's one of the first principles, that we think that we see the same thing others see, hear the same thing others hear, and you know, experience the same things others experience, but we don't. Because of the reality gaps, human beings experience things differently. And I've worked with many leaders, senior leaders, CEOs at tops of companies, who think that they're doing good things for their people when they're not. That's why the importance of connecting intention and impact is so vital for all of us. And so the way that I work with leaders is to be transparent. In my book, I talk about the trust model, which is T is for transparency. To start a process of rebuilding trust, you need to walk through the 5 gates that build trust. And the first one is being transparent with people about what you know and don't know, or what you've done and not done, or what you've been and not been. When a leader can step into that space, honestly, people feel the difference about their honest sharing. And then they have to focus on relationships and rebuilding the relationships. And then they have to focus on more deeply understanding what others are seeing and how they're feeling. And then they need to focus on crafting together a view of shared success, because their success was probably not what others saw as success. And so forming mutual success brings the energetic fields together for people to actually live in that reality, that future space together. And then the last one is being willing to tell the truth when reality gaps exist and working on them together. That cycle, and doing that cycle over and over again, is one of the most amazing shifters in our ability to build and rebuild trust, as long as we use it over and over again. And when we have stepped over the line or not been true to what other people call living in trust, that we're willing to look at ourselves in the mirror and saying we might have something to do with that and to work on the rebuild again. We're all human beings, and sometimes we do make mistakes. That's an important piece to remember.
Okay, thank you, Judith. And I think we have one final question here in this section. It comes from Diane. How can you become more conversationally intelligent?
Oh, Diane, let's have a phone call. Come to my session. Come to my session. I wrote the book to be a handbook and a field book for people who want to learn conversational intelligence. I get things sent to me every day from people who are using it with their children, just the book as a workbook. Where a couple sent it, they put it on Amazon. They said, we each bought the book, we read a chapter at a time, we sat down with each other, and we started to work on our conversations and elevating them together. I think once people start to hear more about conversational intelligence, it will activate your natural instincts to be more conversational intelligent. People keep saying, yes, I knew it. I knew that's what was going on inside of me. And so I'm just saying, immersing yourself in it will reactivate something that is already hardwired in you, Diane. Your interest is the best place to start.
Okay, thank you.
So I'm back, yay.
Yes.
And as we move into some final questions, I think you've covered so much with us, Judith, and there's so many questions that we really aren't able to handle. So if we can allow Bill to have the control now, and I'll ask you some final questions. Is that okay?
Absolutely.
All right. So Mateo asked, can you walk me through one model that I can take away from this webinar and apply to my work and my life going forward?
I will give you two things to do, and I won't call it a model, although it's part of a model, but I will give you two things to work on. The first one is to experiment, be an experimenter, a mentor of the experiment to yourself, to try to focus on learning how to listen to connect. What we know is that the brain is designed to be judgmental. It's designed to be discerning. When we go to school, when we go to work, we're learning how to make decisions. Every decision is a discernment or a judgment call that you have to make. That part of our brain is highly active 99.9% of the time, except we're in a dream state or an aspirational state. And so I'd love you to practice noticing when you're listening to judge and when you're listening to connect. And see if you can hold the space open with people to move judgment out of the way and enable that feeling of full acceptance, appreciation, and understanding of another person. People feel that. We are so sensitive to judgment, it's incredible. I had a call from someone that heard me on a webinar from Australia. She had a daughter that was having some issues and challenges. They couldn't even say, they said she was autistic, she was marginal autistic, all the things about a child not engaging in certain ways, but it didn't fit the profile, the standard profile. I asked the woman to allow me to listen, to talk with her for a little while, which I did. I was able to give her feedback that she came across highly controlling, judgmental, even though it was caring for her. It came across to the receiver as something different. And I asked her to practice listening to connect with her daughter and then call me and tell me what happened. And when she called the next day, she said, I have to tell you, I cannot believe how differently my daughter is showing up. The story ends with her coming to the United States, bringing her daughter and her husband, sharing time together, expanding her ability to learn, listen to connect, ask questions for which you don't have answers, priming for trust, sustaining conversational agility. Those are the parts that we call laps that you have to take when you become better at conversational intelligence. But she's now starting an Australian division of Creating We Institute. It is just amazing to me how what seems to be simple practices can have such a profound effect on our chemistry and the electrical fields that bond people together. So I would hope that you would be willing to test some of these out, Matteo, in your everyday life.
Okay. Charlotte says, I'm not ready to retire. I love being in the mix of the work world. How do you deal with age barriers?
You don't believe them, for goodness sakes. That there are more people right now living to be 100 than any other category in the history of the world and in any other time frame of lives. Being 100 is going to be more commonplace. Children that were born today will live to be 147, according to researchers who study this field. So let go. I don't know what old is. Truthfully, my daughter and I laugh because she says, Mom, you're counting backwards. Now you're younger than me. So
it sounds like, Charlotte, you've got to do some conversational intelligence with yourself. So Steve is asking, how does a follower instinctively define and interpret authentic leadership behaviors?
First of all, I really have to ask you to stop talking about, to let go of the word followers in the context of this work. I think that model of leaders and followers, which has been around for zillions of years, is getting in the way of us learning how to move from power over to power with others. Regardless of the role that you have or the title that you have or anything that you have, if we teach young kids how to be able to connect with other human beings in power with relationships, you can be the president of a company but do power with. Therefore, followership is less significant in the model that we're inventing for the world that we are moving into. So.
Okay. All right. And here's a question from Madeline. Is there a measurable difference between genders?
Now, Madeline, here we go again with one of these big questions. like quantum physics, days will take to answer this. There's a lot that's being researched every day about gender differences. What we're now seeing is there are certain patterns of processing that men have that are different than women. However, what we're learning also is that, and 25% of how men think, or men have women's brains and women have men's brains. There's lots of research about that right now. We know that men have more processed with more testosterone under stress. Women use more bonding and oxytocin under stress. Those are some of the differences that seem to be validated anywhere in the world. But the beauty of this is that even if we have those differences, now is the time to step out of and having those differences make a difference, and having us use those differences to learn about how human beings individually are different from each other and what to do about it. So to bring the genders together, to downregulate the stereotypes, so that human beings can be who they want to be and who they need to be, and use that insight about genders to help us cascade the world in that direction. That would be my hope for the future.
Okay. And one final question, and actually, Judith, this one goes back to engagement, but I think it may have a place right here, and a good wrap-up question from the questions that we received prior to. Richard asked, I developed compliance training for a government agency. I've used video as one tool to try to make training more convincing, more likely to get people to actually comply. What other tools could be useful to convince staff to do what is required when it is not something they might otherwise take seriously?
The word comply is sitting right in the middle of the real dialogue about conversational intelligence. This may or may not apply for Richard, and I hope it's helpful, is that the more we ask people to comply, the more we try to sell them on the idea of complying. That becomes tell, sell, yell. When we become so energetic that we're trying harder to make them buy something, that causes more resistance in people, and the likelihood of them being committed, heart, mind, and spirit, is going to be lower than if we stopped using the force of compliance and actually became more curious about what might be stepping in the way for people, or what might excite them about putting some of these great practices into place. What would be the value for them of putting some of these compliance practices in place, how it'll help the world. So using the pull strategies, not the push, not the sell, tell, but being curious and discovery. So I would say stepping into level 3 with people to finding out what would make this a wonderful part of the work that they do. would be a slightly different strategy for Richard to experiment with, and I'd love to hear how it turns out.
Okay. Well, this is about all the time we have for questions. There's a little more information to share, but we certainly do want to thank you, Judith, for trying to get through some really deep and probing questions in a very succinct way. And there is a way to answer more of these questions during the conference. So we'd like to just answer a couple of general conference questions for folks while they're on the line, and to give you an idea of why it would be beneficial or why it would be worth your time to spend time in the conference, and a little bit of it. And Bill, you can go ahead and put up the rest of the points on the screen. The 4 things that we're trying to do, the 4 things that we are hanging on in this conference is to learn, to grow, to share, and to inspire. This is what we're planning to do on April 24th. Look at new ways to get information, which Judith has opened up one of the topics, and it's one of 17 different topics we'll talk about. And through this learning and practicing and seeing things differently and having conversations with people, we will grow. And we'll grow for ourselves, and we'll grow for our communities. CBODN is about sharing. So we're sharing, we're learning to share what we know, what we have, looking at opportunities to share time to learn more and explore more. And through doing all of that, we feel that we will be inspiring each other as well as inspiring the folks that we work with. When we started out, and you can go ahead, Bill, move to the next one. When we started out, we defined sustainable communities, because that's our theme, cultivating sustainable communities. We defined it as the ability to be sustained, supported, upheld, or confirmed. We want to develop deep roots, strong structures, and enduring values, encourage innovation, adaptability, and growth. So that's what this whole conference has been built upon. How do we sustain communities? And when we thought about OD, it's such a large, vast area. We're really involved with lots of other professions. So we did an early intention to engage others, Bill, to engage others and engage a deeper community. So we have things for facilitators as well as HR specialists and HR professionals, coaches, trainers, leaders. We're looking, because all of these professions are tied into OD. So we wanted to make sure that we involved and had topics that would be applicable for those communities. What's the bottom line of sustainability? It's about people, planet, and profit. And that's exactly what we're addressing in the various workshops. And we hope that you will take a look at the workshops that we have by visiting our website. And there's something very special we are offering everyone who is listening to or will listen to the recording of this webinar with Judith. If you go to www.cbodnconference.org and register using the code GREEN in the promotional field, if you just type in the word GREEN, you will receive $20 off of your conference registration. This is just our thank you way, our way of saying how we're going to be able to sustain our community and to do a little something for those who have taken their time to participate. And so with that, Bill.
Okay, thank you, Karen. Yeah, I'd like to thank everybody for attending, and we'd really like to thank the people who submitted their questions and really co-created this presentation with us. They were very, very good questions, yes. And we really appreciate it. And Judith, we appreciate you bringing your heart, mind, and spirit and all your experience here. It was a fabulous presentation. It's been wonderful to work for you, and I work with you, and can't wait to see you at the conference.
Oh, I love the community that you have created. I am astounded by the questions. I've never had questions that seem so profound and provocative ever. So I can't wait to be at the conference and meet people in person. Thank you.
And not only the conference, but Judith is doing a post-conference workshop on that Saturday morning. It's a 4-hour workshop, so it'll give you an opportunity to take a deeper dive into this area of conversational intelligence and neuroscience and understanding how we can have better conversations to have better relationships, create our communities. It is a great opportunity. All of this information is on the website, Bill, can we go back to that slide so that everyone can see that it was still there?
Yeah, the same.
www.
CBODNconference.org.
Thank you. CBODN conference. That's what happens when you're too involved. CBODNconference.org. Thank you, everyone.
Yes, thank you. This concludes the conference.